Hey guys, Nathan here again. Absurd Being, Kierkegaard number 16. So I think this is going, after this video there are going to be two more, I think. So we're almost at the end. Looking at that diagram, where we are today, we are down in the bottom right corner, finishing up this little section, talking about temporality and the moment. So we'll just jump straight into it with temporality first. So temporality, Kierkegaard talks a lot about temporality and kind of describes or fleshes out what he means by temporality in the concept of anxiety, which we'll come to. But first of all, I want to look at a shorter kind of preamble, if you like, to this idea, which appears in Philosophical Crumbs. And Kierkegaard there's no in-depth discussion of temporality, but we get a feel for some elements of how he's going to describe temporality. And it's just another a relevant piece of information, I think, that's useful to to look at. So, Philosophical Crumbs, there's an interlude which Kierkegaard titles, "Is the past more necessary than the future?" And in the context of that question, he says that we know that the past can't be changed, so it's fixed. But despite that, he says it's still not necessary. And so, actually, I should probably take a step back. Is the past more necessary than the future? The question there seems to make sense, because when you think about the past, it is fixed. It can't change. So then does it have this kind of quality of being necessary? Something that's fixed, unchanging, can't be changed. That would seem to meet the definition of necessary. So Kierkegaard asks this question: is the past more necessary than the future? And he says it's not necessary. Even though it can't be changed, it's not necessary. And in the same way, the future, which even though it hasn't happened yet, doesn't make it less necessary than the past. And in fact, neither of those, past or the future, are necessary for Kierkegaard. And we've talked about this a long time ago when we talked about the change of becoming. And becoming was, we saw the change of becoming is not, there's nothing necessary about it. It's not grounded in necessity. Rather, it's grounded in freedom. So the change of becoming is grounded in freedom. The past and the future, time, this is a change of becoming. Therefore, it must also be grounded in freedom, not in necessity. So the conclusion for that, to answer that question briefly, is the past more necessary than the future? No, it isn't. It's not necessary, and the future isn't necessary either. Both being part of time or temporality, which is a change of becoming, and that's why it's not necessary. That's why they are not necessary, past and the future. So the next question then Kierkegaard asks is, well, how do we apprehend the past? How do we come to know it? How can we understand it? And this makes sense because in nature, there is only immediate existence. There is no time, right? There's no time for a tree. It's always now. And even for some lower species of animal, there is no sense of a past and a future. There's just this immediate existence. Humans, on the other hand, do have a past. We have a history. And this is because we are dialectical with respect to time. And if you remember the word dialectical, Kierkegaard uses it a lot, and it means this kind of relation or interplay between two things, two aspects, two entities, and that's what we see here. We are dialectical with respect to time. We have this relation with time. We have a dynamic with time, and Kierkegaard uses that expression, dialectical with respect to time, to capture that idea. So that's all that means. We are open to time. We're open to the past. But we can still flesh this out a little bit more. How do we apprehend the past? And there's a quote that I want to work through in a bit of detail. Immediate sensation and immediate cognition cannot deceive. This in itself shows that the historical cannot be the object of either, because the historical has within it the duplicity that is becomings. In relation to the immediate, becoming is namely a duplicity through which that which is most certain is made doubtful. So I want to step through this quote a little more carefully and just break it down. So that first section, the first sentence, immediate sensation and immediate cognition cannot deceive. Obviously, Kierkegaard's not saying we're never wrong, we're never mistaken. Obviously, we can be wrong. We can make errors in what we sense or what we think. But that's grasping this idea from the wrong end. We're not talking about objective truth, objective certainty here. Obviously, we can be wrong about things, right? I can think, for example, that this flower is red, when actually it's a different color, and I'm being deceived by, I don't know, I've got some kind of illness or something, or there's something funny about the lighting conditions making the flower look red. But what I can't be deceived about is that I perceive that flower as red. So it's a phenomenological statement, I think, rather than the claim that we can never be deceived about anything, because obviously we can. So that's the first point. We're in the subjective, not in the objective realm here when we're talking about immediate sensation and immediate cognition not deceiving us. The next point, this in itself shows that the historical cannot be the object of either, because the historical has within it the duplicity that is becomings. So the first point I want to make there is that the historical is a change of becoming. I'm trying to read my scroll. So the historical is a change of becoming. It's not a transformation, or it's not necessary. It's a change of becoming, which if you remember from a long time ago, moves from possibility to actual, or non-being to being. And because it is a change of becoming, it means that it's duplicitous. It has this duplicity, Kierkegaard says. This change of becoming is duplicitous, which means that even though we know for certain what has happened because of the presence of the immediate, because we can't be deceived in that way, we know for certain what has happened, we can't know for certain that it has happened. We can't know for certain that this change has come about in time, because becoming cannot be immediately and directly known. It's a change in time. It's a change of non-being to being, and that change can't be known. We can't be certain of that change. We can't. Another way to say this is we can't directly apprehend temporality. We can't directly apprehend change. all we see is what was there before and what's there now. And we can be certain about what was there before, and we can be certain about what's there now. That's that immediate sensation, immediate cognition. But what we can't be certain about is that change that took place in the middle. And because we can't apprehend temporality, becoming can't be immediately and directly known. And that is a very interesting thing to say, I think. And it's very insightful there. So what else do I want to say? The historical can only be historical through becoming, but becoming itself cannot be sensed or thought because of the duplicity of becoming. Okay, I think I've covered all of that. And yet, so even though we don't have this, we can't directly perceive or apprehend time or temporality or becoming, we do feel that we know something has changed. We do feel that we do understand and apprehend this change of becoming. How? That's Kierkegaard's ultimate question. How do we, even though we can't, how do we think that we know this change? We think that we are able to grasp this change of becoming, this temporality. And he answers it with this quote: "This much is clear. The organ for the historical must be made in likeness to the historical itself. It must have something within it through which it constantly, in its certainty, cancels the uncertainty that corresponds to the uncertainty of becoming, which is twofold: the nothingness of non-being and the annihilated possibility, which is, in addition, the annihilation of every other possibility." So, okay, actually that hasn't answered that question, right? It's just laid it out in more starkly, laid it out in more detail. However it is that we are aware of the historical, the past, temporality, the organ by which we are aware of it must share something in common with the historical, with the past, with temporality. And it must be able to cancel this uncertainty, this duplicity that we saw of becoming. And Kierkegaard just fleshes that out a little bit as well. That's uncertainty, which he says is twofold: the nothingness of non-being and the annihilated possibility. And there he's just talking about how becoming is uncertain. First, because you've got non-being. That's where you start with, right? You go from non-being to being. That's the change of becoming. And that's uncertain. Necessarily, there's uncertainty there, non-being. We can't grasp that in any kind of clear, direct manner. So that's the first point of, I guess, ambiguity or uncertainty. And also the annihilated possibility, which is also the annihilation of every other possibility. So when that we go from non-being to being, from possibility to actuality, that possibility being annihilated, where does it go? How does that happen? There's more uncertainty there. And what about all the other possibilities that aren't actualized? Same thing. Heidegger picks up on that and talks and brings that into his discussion on temporality as well. And specifically, he talks about it in context of authenticity, but that's another 20 video series. So anyway, back to this question: how do we know that this change of becoming has taken place? How can we perceive the historical? And the answer, the organ that Kierkegaard references in that quote, is belief. So he cashes it out by saying that ultimately it's belief. We have to believe it. We can't know it for a fact. So kind of a disappointing conclusion, right? I mean, it feels like there's some real ground made here, some real ground covered, talking about temporality like this, and then just to kind of wrap it up by saying, in the end, we just believe it. We have to believe it. It seems a little bit unsatisfying, but anyway, that's the first part. So that's what Kierkegaard talks about in Philosophical Crumbs. Now let's move into the concept of anxiety, and we'll break apart this idea of temporality in a bit more detail. All right, so time. So we're still talking about time. Time is an infinite succession of moments, I guess we can say, but it's not present, past, and future. So that's the first distinction that Kierkegaard draws. Time is just this succession, this infinite succession of moments, but there's no past, present, or future inherent in this idea of time. There's no point within this infinite succession of time in which we can gain a foothold, a dividing point, a present, to break it up into these three dimensions: past, present, and future. And Kierkegaard says no instant is a present. Each instant is merely a passing by. So that's the first point, and it ties in with what we said at the beginning of the video, that nature only has immediate existence. If you look at the world without a human perspective, without a conscious perspective, there is no past, present, or future. There's just this infinite succession of moments. There's nothing to structure that succession. So then, a couple of questions. What is the present? And Kierkegaard has an interesting answer to this. It's actually the eternal, he says. How does he get to that? Well, the present is, what is the present? It's an annulled succession. It's a moment without past or future. And that is exactly how we would define the eternal, right? An annulled succession, a moment without past or future. So life lived in time, as we think about it here, without past, present, or future, life lived in time has no present, because the present can only exist in the eternal. The present is the eternal. So obviously, if we're in time and the eternal are opposite. So obviously, if we're in time, there can't be the eternal, and there can't therefore be any present. So just reinforcing that idea. So what about the instant then? We can ask about the instant. What is the instant? And I've got a quote for this. The instant is that abstraction from the eternal that, if it is to be present, is its parody. So the instant isn't a present either. It's an abstraction from the eternal. So it's, Kierkegaard mentioned it before. I mentioned it before. It's a passing by. That's what the instant is. It's not anything in itself. It doesn't serve to break up time or structure time in any way. It's just what that infinite succession is made up of. Instants, just continually, one kind of succeeding the other. It's just this flow of instants, but it's not anything in itself. It's certainly not present, and Kierkegaard calls it an abstraction from the eternal. Okay, so let's get a quote that will tie us down a little bit, hopefully. The instant signifies the present as a something that has no past and no future, for it is just in this that the imperfection of the sensuous life lies. The eternal too signifies the present, which has no past and no future, and this is the perfection of the eternal. Okay, so there are a couple of things to unpack there. First of all, the instant signifies the present. So it isn't the present, we established that, but it signifies the present as something that has no past or future, as something as the eternal, and that instant is which signifies the present is the imperfection of the sensuous life. So it's we're talking about two realms here. We're talking about the eternal and time, and the instant being part of time is part of the imperfection. It's part of the what makes the sensual world caught up in this time rather than in the eternal. So it's why we have this infinite succession in the first place, is due to this instant, and because it's opposed, or it stands in contradistinction to the eternal. Kierkegaard calls it the imperfection of the sensuous life. The eternal, on the other hand, also signifies the present, which we saw there was a link between those two, and this is the perfection of the eternal. So the present is the perfection of the eternal as time with no past and no future. No infinite succession here, no succession of instants, one to the next. So what we can see here is that there is a connection, though, between the eternal and time, and it will become clear that connection through the present is made in time via the instant. And I think I've got a quote which will get us there. If time and eternity touch each other, then it must be in time, and now we are with the instant. The instant is not properly an atom of time, but an atom of eternity. It is eternity's first reflection in time, its first attempt to, as though, bring time to a stop. And I've got another one which I'll give you straight away. The instant is that ambiguity in which time and eternity touch each other, and with this, the concept of temporality is posited, whereby time constantly intersects eternity and eternity constantly permeates time. Only now does the aforementioned division acquire its significance: the present time, the past time, the future time. So I think those two quotes really get at exactly what I'm trying to make, the point I'm trying to make here. We've got those two realms, the eternal and time. One being the infinite, the absolute. The other being the relative, the physical. And there is a point of connection, though, between the two, and that point is the present. But the present is the eternal, but the present in time is represented by or signified by the instant. And so it's that the only way that we can see a connection here, or if there is to be a connection, it must appear in time in some way, and it appears in time, this link to the eternal through the present, which signifies, that's a big mistake, through the instant, which signifies the present, which is eternity. So that's the point, and that's a really, again, I really like that idea. That seems to really have, that resonates with me quite strongly. And it's only after that, so once we have that, once we have this idea of the instant and eternity pervading the sensuous realm through time, through the instant, it's only at that point that time acquires structure, the structure of the past, the present, and the future. And so it's only through that we can come to know the past. It's only through that we can be historical. And that ties back into the questions that Kierkegaard was asking in Philosophical Crumbs. And in that last quote also, we see for the first time the distinction between time and temporality. The instant is that ambiguity in which time and eternity touch each other, and with this the concept of temporality is posited, whereby time constantly intersects eternity and eternity constantly permeates time. So we get this distinction for the first time, and that's interesting to see, nice to see too, right? So time is this infinite succession in the sensuous, lacking past, present, and future, no structure. But temporality being the way time and eternity intersect through the instant, which produces or posits the present, opens up a past and a future. Cool. That's nice. I like that. But as always, there's a religious undertone to this. And Kierkegaard wants to differentiate between the past and the future. He wants to have this structure. He wants to have this, to make this distinction, because without it, for him, everything is lost. Then his Christian worldview then doesn't make sense. And I can summarize it with this quote. One then gets, so if there is no distinction between past and present and future, if there's no temporality, if all we have is immediate succession, one then gets the past not by itself, but in a simple continuity with the future, the meaning of world history and the historical development of the individual, thereby losing the concepts of conversion, atonement, and redemption. One gets the future not by itself, but in a simple continuity with the present, the concepts of resurrection and judgment thereby being laid in ruins. So if you if you don't have this distinction, time and temporality, you don't have this structure, then you don't have a past. All you have is an infinite succession. And if you don't have a past, you don't have conversion, atonement, redemption. None of these things, none of these concepts mean anything. And obviously they're all central to Christianity. And you don't have a future by itself. You don't have anything we can apprehend there. It's just infinite succession. And if you don't have a future, then there's no such thing as resurrection, judgment. These things fall by the wayside as well. So Kierkegaard needs them to justify, to support his Christian beliefs. Luckily for us, because it means that he embarked on a very insightful an insightful foray into what time is, what it really means, and I think came up with something quite unique and something interesting that definitely Heidegger picked up on afterwards and borrows quite a lot. And just one last point here, in terms of past, present, and future. The future has particular value for Kierkegaard, and this quote captures this. The future means more than the present and the past, for Kierkegaard at least, because the future is, in a sense, the whole of which the past is a part, and the future can, in a sense, mean the whole. This is because the eternal means first the future. The instant and the future, in turn, posit the past. And I think you can make a solid argument for that. And Heidegger definitely does. He follows Kierkegaard in this and holds that the future is of more importance than the past and the present. And also there's there's more religious support for this from Kierkegaard in the postscript, this idea of the future being more important, where he says that the appearance of God in time prevents the individual from relating backwards to the eternal, since he is now in a forward direction, coming to be eternal in time through the relation to the God in time. So he's obviously talking about Jesus and the incarnation, Jesus incarnating or God incarnating in human form, and that prevents us from seeing or relating to, being dialectical with the eternal in the past, because time kind of begins from that moment, and we take our cues from there, so we relate to the eternal. We relate through that God, through Jesus, to the eternal. And so we don't have to go backwards. I think I'm belaboring that point, and it's not really that important anyway. So anyway, that is temporality. That's what Kierkegaard has to say about it. Very interesting stuff. Let's move on to the moment. So the moment is, I think I'll give you a quote first, and then we'll flesh out exactly what the idea is here. So the moment is that time when an existing subject can be in a unity of infinite and finite that transcends existing. This moment is the instant of passion. In passion, the existing subject is infinitized in the eternity of imagination, and yet is also most definitely himself. So basically here, the moment is, I've written, it's an instant raised to the infinite power by passion and resoluteness. It's an instant which has crucial significance and importance for someone. And the way Kierkegaard describes that is that it's a unity of the infinite and the finite. So it's again, it ties in with everything we talked about in the last video, with the decision and how it has to be made with resoluteness, and in the way that necessarily involves passion. You have to be passionately involved. You have to commit to whatever it is that you're doing. And most of the time we're talking about the absolute telos here, so committing to religion, committing to your religious worldview. And so that, in that sense, that's the infinite. That's you are infinitely interested. You're committing yourself to this, but it's also a blend of the finite, because you are finite as well. You're straddling both of those dimensions. So that's basically what the moment is. It's a crucial, significant instant for an individual. And he contrasts this with the Greeks, for whom, or particularly Plato, I guess, learning was recollection. And Plato talks about learning being nothing more than recollection. So we already know everything, because we've come from a realm of the forms. We've been in contact with all the forms. We know everything there is to know. We've just forgotten it when we're down here on earth. And so when we learn something, we're not learning it for the first time. Rather, we're just remembering what we'd forgotten. So for the Greeks, learning was recollection, which meant that every temporal point of departure was insignificant. The truth, we already know the truth. The truth is in us already. We already have it. We're just being reminded of it. So there's no moment for the Greeks, is what Kierkegaard's saying here. No temporal point has any real significance, no crucial import, because it's all just remembering. We're just remembering what we already knew. None of these, and whenever we're learning something, we're not or making a decision. None of these things are happening with the import that Kierkegaard wants to impute to the moment. And I think I'm just going to say the same thing. I'm just going to read it. The moment is a temporal point which has decisive, infinite importance for the individual. And obviously there's a biblical reference or a religious reference here. Kierkegaard says it's the fullness of time, which is a biblical reference to when God sent Jesus, or when God came to earth as Jesus. Don't even get me started on the contradictions there. But again, that point, that moment, has decisive importance. That is a moment for Kierkegaard, because it's crucial. It's important for every individual in the Christian worldview. And it's a transition point so significant, the moment. Kierkegaard talks about it as a transition from non-being to being. So we have that, reinforcing this idea, what it is. And there's something interesting, another interesting point I want to close with, kind of bringing the moment and paradox together. So in the Philosophical Crumbs, Kierkegaard mentions that paradox is the passion of thought. I think we've covered this before. Thought always, by its very nature, wants to discover something that it cannot think. It wants to go beyond itself. And the reason is that in thinking, when you are thinking, you're transcending yourself. You're going beyond yourself. So thought, by its very nature, by virtue of what it is a going beyond itself, and so it's always pushing beyond, looking to discover something that it can't think. And it's this paradox which leads us to posit an unknown we call God. So that's the main thought. And just linking the moment and paradox here, there's an analogy which hopefully will shed some light on this, an analogy to romantic love. So Kierkegaard claims that self-love lies at the heart of love, and the paradoxical passion of self-love is to will its own downfall. And the way it goes about doing this is by loving someone else. So through loving someone else, your self-love is trying to defeat itself, is trying to overcome itself. And it does that by loving someone else. And in this moment of passion, these two forces understand each other. The will to annihilate itself, of self-love, and the love of someone else, these two forces understand each other, come together in what we call love. And in this, self-love is overcome but not destroyed. It remains, he says, as the temptation of romantic love. So that's interesting as an analogy, romantic love. And we can compare this then to the understanding as well. So this is going to tie us back in with the thought I opened this part with. The paradox here in the understanding is where the understanding wants to annihilate itself, as we saw, wants to transcend itself, wants to find a thought that it can't think. And so the understanding wills its own downfall by trying to think something that it can't think. And in this moment of passion, these two forces understand each other. the understanding willing its own downfall, but also reaching outwards for a thought that it can't think. These two forces understand each other in a moment of passion, and this passion is called faith, as opposed to the passion which was called love in the earlier analogy. And here the understanding again isn't overcome, but it remains as the temptation of faith. And so that's obviously the thought that it can't think, the thought that the understanding can't think is God here. So that is a little kind of a way that I think the moment and paradox come together, and it's also a little maybe a defense or argument for the existence of God. Obviously Kierkegaard doesn't argue for the existence of God. There are no proofs, but it's a way to kind of make it more plausible, I guess, if you're so inclined. Okay, so that's where I'm at with this. Let's have a quick look at a summary. So first we looked at temporality. We saw that time is an infinite succession. There's no past, present, or future. The present is also eternity because there is no past and no future. The instant signifies the present, and temporality arises where time and eternity intersect in the instant. So temporality gives us, for the first time, existence in the three dimensions of time: past, present, and future. And I said as well that the future is more important for Kierkegaard. We also looked at the moment, and we saw that it's an instant of decisive, infinite importance for the individual. Again, as with all of these things, characterized by passion for Kierkegaard. Okay, so that's the end of this video. That's 16. Like I say, I think there are 2 more to go. The next one might be, I think I can do it in 1. We'll see how we go. But anyway, thanks for listening. I think this was kind of interesting. I did find I quite like this Kierkegaard's take on temporality, and I think Heidegger picks up on a lot of this stuff, and in a way kind of de-religifies, is that a word? De-religifies it for me. Strips the religious out of it for me, anyway. So anyway, thanks for listening, and I will catch you very shortly in the next video.